every time we say goodbye, my dear. I don't know why it's so unclear. Your mouth says go away, but your body's telling me to stay. I don't know just what to do. I just know, darling, I'm in love with you.
Hello, and welcome to There and Then. I'm your host, Don Gutteridge. Thank you for joining me this week. This is a podcast where we take a look at the works of one Canadian author, my grandfather, Don Gutteridge, and find out what inspired him to write, what inspires him today, and get to spend a little time together, and we're so glad to be able to share that with you. This episode, we're taking a look at Don's series of novels, the Mark Edwards Mysteries. They're 12 in number, the first being Turncoat, the last being The Widow's Demise. They're readily available in print in Canada. These are probably Grandpa's most commercially successful books, and they're very different from what he wrote before this, and it's a really interesting conversation we have around these books. They're clearly something that Grandpa's very proud of, and it was really interesting to dig into the inspiration behind them. Well, without any further ado, let's go to my conversation with Don.
I start to go, but you stop me saying no, no, no. I guess I'll stay on by a little longer.
All right. Hello, everybody. I am here again with my grandfather, Don Gutteridge. Hi, Grandpa.
Good day, Tom.
Well, it's lovely to be back. Today, Grandpa and I are going to be discussing the Mark Edwards Mysteries, 12 novels, starting with Turncoat, ending with The Widow's Demise.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole lot in between. Grandpa and I are mainly, as far as content, going to focus on the first three. Up front, we're going to try and avoid spoiling anything. These are mystery novels, so
Right.
we don't want to give too much away, but we're going to talk sort of more about the themes of the book and what it was like to write them and all of that. So I'm really glad we get a chance to share that with everyone. How are you feeling today, Grandpa?
Oh, really good, thanks.
All right. Well, I guess we should probably start at the start. What got you thinking that you wanted to write a series of mystery novels?
Well, when I wrote Bewilderment, the last novel that we looked at in the last session,
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I had written out my literary novels.
Yeah.
And all I had left was my poetry, and even that was very thin in those years. I didn't write a lot of poetry
Right.
from about 97 through to the middle of 2005.
Mm-hmm.
And so I all my life I've been a writer,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking for projects.
Yep.
That's how I got onto a lot of things, of course.
Yeah.
So all my friends and got me interested in reading mysteries
Mm-hmm.
about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I must have read 300 or 400 mysteries,
Mhm.
dozens and dozens of mysteries, particularly historical mysteries set in the 19th century and the Middle Ages. Those were my two favorite ones. And so I thought, I'm not the first novelist to say, I think I'll write a mystery.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I said, I think I'll try and write a mystery. Now, I admired Maureen Jennings' Murdoch mysteries set in the 1890s. I read all of those.
Yep.
And saw the movies made of them and enjoyed them very, very much.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, that decade, that era has been taken. And so I should select another area that I like and am familiar with. So I thought I love the rebellion period.
Yeah.
So I thought I'm going to start the series with the pre-rebellion years, 1835 to 37.
Mm-hmm.
And I immediately ran into a problem.
Yeah.
There were no detectives in 1835.
It's very true.
The old Oxford English Dictionary
Mm-hmm.
says detective comes into the English language in 1841.
Oh.
And the reference is the two detectives interviewed the suspect.
Yeah.
That's the quote from the Oxford English Dictionary.
Right.
So I thought, okay, here I am in 1835. There are no detectives. There were in France in the 20s, but not in England
Right.
or in the United States.
Right.
And so I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll create a young officer of the British Army,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll have him be based in Toronto.
Yep. Then known as York.
And in York. That was the first decision I made, was to center the series in York,
Mm-hmm.
and then later Toronto in 1935.
Mm-hmm.
And so I selected an ensign, a very young officer.
The lowest ranking officer
The lowest
you could
ranking
be.
officer that I could find,
Yeah.
so that I could then move him up as the series went along.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really sure it was going to be a series, although that would be vaguely in my mind when you start a new mystery. And unfortunately, the plot that came to mind was to make it credible.
Yeah.
I had to have either the crime committed, if the crime was committed in Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
the local constabulary would look after it.
Right.
I'll talk about that in a little while, but there was a local constabulary.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, I'll have it in a very small town of Coburg
Mm-hmm.
and Crawford's Corners, which I made up,
Mm-hmm.
which is about 5 miles from Coburg.
Right.
So I thought, I'm going to have him travel out there, and the mystery will be out in that district.
Right.
And that was an unfortunate mistake,
Yeah.
because when you're writing a mystery series, your first novel determines how well the series is going to go.
Yeah.
And I wish the second novel was the first one,
Right.
because of Cobb.
Yes. Well, Constable Cobb's one of the...
I couldn't get Constable Cobb in the first one.
Well, and there is a definite difference between the first two, and that's Turncoat, and then is it Solemn Vows second?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. They're very different tonally, and Solemn Vows does feel more like the first novel in a series. It's interesting to hear you say that, because I had thought that before. That Turncoat is its own sort of hermetic little narrative, and it does...
That's right.
It does introduce Mark in a really interesting way.
Yeah, it sets the backstory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And provide the love interest, which I can develop in later novels.
Yep.
So, I mean, it served that purpose, but it's not the best written mystery of the 12.
Mm-hmm.
What surprised me when I read it yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
I was going to skim it, but I actually read most of it,
Wow.
was how complicated the plot actually was. I had because I haven't thought about it for years, that the plot was much simpler, but there were a number of little twists and tiny turns that I was really quite proud of when I read through it.
Yeah. Well, it does read like a mystery. Clearly, you had been well prepared to write it, because you're using a lot of what I would call the tricks mystery writers use, which is setting up what seems like an obvious objective and then things taking a turn in pursuit of the goal. Like, it's sort of a very common pattern in mystery novels.
That's right.
But it's well executed, absolutely.
Well, what you have to do when you start out is, I'm not a great maker of outlines. My literary novels had no outlines at all.
I know this.
Straight out. But I knew in a mystery, you have to know who's killed, who did it, and how they did it. So those are the first decisions to make.
Yep.
And then you have to create, and I remember drawing up pages which are in the archives. You could find them, pages of the list of the characters and their eye color and their characteristics, and I did write all of that out.
Yep.
And but the plot, well, it is generally shaped. I knew how I was going to get to the murderer. The rest is improvised, just the way I've always written. It didn't. The basic writing pattern really didn't change.
And so I guess that leads to a question I had, which is, in a lot of your process has varied over the years, but sometimes you would just sort of dive into a novel and write it through, or you would write in spurts. How did Edwards compare to some of the others?
Well, very much the same. In that the one thing I did differently is I did read more background material to get the first novel started. And what I used to do in my literary novels was I get going, and as soon as I needed some research, I would go and look for it. That's what I did with Lily's story. As I came to the new decades, I had new books I had to read, new articles I had to read.
Right.
So I made a list in the beginning of Turncoat.
Oh, okay.
I won't mention all of them, but I'll show you the kind of thing that I read. And these were the days when I used to simply roam the Weldon Library and go up and down the shelves and look for old things. And get in the right section and just see what they had. Today you just Google it. But in those days you had to literally go to the library and go through. And
so Grandpa has his copy of Turncoat, and he's
I've
going
got
to read
my
from
copy
it.
right in front of me. Toronto and Coburg, of course, were and are real towns. Coffer's Corners is imaginary, and so on. But a number of books provided useful background information and serendipitously suggested ideas that made their way into the story.
Right.
This basic one was a very famous book by Edwin C. Guillet, Early Life in Upper Canada. That has everything from what they eat, how they chop wood, everything. It's a huge compendium of information on the early 19th century. Then there was E.C. Kite's, K-Y-T-E, E.C. Kite's Old Toronto. And that was wonderful. It was a street guy. What it did was it was set up so that you started at one end of King Street, and you simply walked along, and he described every store, every business, every newspaper as you came to them. And so I had a complete map of the central part of Toronto, which was pretty much all that existed. In those days, it was only about 5 or 6 blocks either way. And then Frank Walker's Sketches of Old Toronto, that had pictures of places like Government House, which I wanted to have because I thought, I wonder what Government House would look like. Well, it was just an old mansion with a big veranda out in the front of it and all that sort of thing, and that gets into the book. Then I really hit gold because I remember I was fishing around for a place outside of Toronto in order to set the first novel. So I come across Percy Climo's Early Coburg. And there it is, a little 24-page pamphlet about Coburg in the 1830s. With a map of the downtown and all the businesses, which, and the names that I use are all real in there when they go into the trip of Coburg, the Emporium and where the church was and where the township hall was. All that is really quite real. So, and this is unusual for me, is to do that up front. Although I probably didn't look at Early Coburg until I actually got them in there. That's normally the way I would proceed, but I certainly did all those earlier ones. And then I mentioned in an earlier session we had Recollections of Buffalo, because there was reference to Buffalo, and I got a lot of the names. And as I say here, an inexhaustible source of interesting names. Then I read The Life of Sir John Colborne, even though he only appears in. I wanted to make sure that I could draw a portrait of him, a little character sketch of him.
Yeah.
And Charles Lindley's The Life and Times of William Lyon Mackenzie, because Mackenzie figures in this one and in the next one as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then my Bible is this one.
Oh.
Upper Canada.
Huh.
1784 to 1841 by Gerald M. Craig. It's the standard history of that period.
Okay.
Published years ago by McClellan and Stewart.
Yeah.
And
Is that like more of an overview?
Yeah.
Okay.
It has the whole history.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, I didn't read it right through, which is not my... because it's a long book.
Yeah,
but
dense.
I consulted it at key times.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was my historical grounding when I really wanted the true facts of what happened here, there, and everywhere.
Yep.
So what I've got now is I've got an ensign who's given an assignment in Coburg or Crawford's Corners near Coburg to solve the murder of a possible man who acted as an agent for Sir John Colborne.
Yep.
And from there it's just started. Then,
Mm-hmm.
then I start creating suspects. This is the standard way you write.
Yep.
I mean, in a way, they are formulaic by their nature. They're genre novels.
Mm-hmm.
But what you do is I try to invent really interesting characters.
Yep.
And the when Mark goes, and of course Mark is a young aristocrat who's really an ingenue in the wilderness.
Yes. And
there are some comic scenes when he goes from one of those farmhouses to another one.
Yep.
And there is some humor in the book, but it's also about, as one reviewer said, on the back of the book, as Mark learns, we learn.
Yep.
So I'm trying to create an historical count of that particular time and place.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a natural to have an ingenue rather than a veteran detective, which you might start out if you were going to write a series. You'd have a main detective and a sidekick.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a main detective who's a Tory in a reform-dominated province.
Yes.
Going out into the hinterland full of reformists and sort of getting bounced around from one to the other, from one bed to another bed, and all that sort of thing. So I had a book.
Yeah, all the structural elements of a book.
Of a book, yeah. And so that from that point on, you just write. And I have no trouble creating characters like Bella Heslop, for example. You might remember her as Sophie from Lily's Story.
Lily's Story.
Or M from Winter's Descent.
Winter's Descent.
There's a certain similarity in those tough female characters that I create, and they're often quite obscene and shocking, and of course
refreshingly so.
And that's because Mark is shocked.
Yeah.
I mean, he comes from a society where women are sort of, theoretically anyway, put on a pedestal, and here he is out here among these tough farm women, and who don't mind telling him where to go when they feel like it.
And so this leads me to something I sort of wondered about, and I guess over the course of the series, of course, like any character does, Mark develops as a character. He rises in rank. He has romances that are successful and non-successful. He grows as a character, and he evolves. Now, did you have a sense of how you wanted that character to evolve, or was it more organic?
Yes. The first two books, once I finished the first one, I thought, as soon as I wrote the ending about Mark leaving and falling in love with Beth, I knew I had the beginning of a series that I had to carry on for at least another novel or two. It was initially going to be a trilogy.
Yeah, I remember that.
Authors always think about trilogy,
I remember
and
that.
I thought, well, that's probably all I've got in me. I'm not a great mystery novelist. So yeah, I thought I've got to at least get that going. And so then I move. Mark starts to move from being a high Tory to a middling Tory, and eventually, by the fourth novel, Dubious Allegiance, he's actually fighting in Quebec. He's so disgusted with the corrupt politics and the horrors of war, and burning people's barns and houses down, that he comes back and quits.
Yep.
And so I actually, there is a tetralogy there. And he comes back to Beth at the end of the fourth one. And I could well have stopped the series there.
Yeah. What kept you going?
Other ideas. The one, Bloody Relations, was initially called Lord Durham's Dilemma. And that's probably when I decided, I'm just guessing now, but that's probably when I decided to develop the responsible government narrative arc, which goes through the whole 12 books. That wasn't initially what I had in mind. I wanted to get the rebellion involved, and I decided to do the Quebec Rebellion and have Mark involved in that. And he solves a mystery on the way home, but he comes back and quits the army, and comes back to Beth.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting that greater narrative presented itself over time, but that wasn't your intent.
That was not my initial intent. No,
because if the series has an overarching,
the thought of writing 12 novels.
Yeah, it's serious. Now, this is just, I guess, a technical thing, but how long would it take you to write a Mark Edwards novel? Like, how many months, a year, like what?
I sit down with my pencil and my yellow pad, and I probably write for 4 to 6 weeks, a first draft.
Yeah.
And then I use every other line, and then I take another colored pen, and I go through and I rewrite and I rewrite and I rewrite, and I add a few little sections and so on. But it's essentially, after that, probably 2 months, I've got 95% of it.
Yeah.
So then I type it onto the computer, and it's amazing what happens when you see it in print.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the pen comes out, or the eraser comes out, and you start to edit it down.
Yeah.
And then I would print it out, and I would sit with the printout and make maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 tiny little changes here and there.
Yeah.
And that's the process.
And at what point do you send this to another editor? Do you?
No.
Okay.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I did send the first 2, which they were written one winter and the next winter.
Yeah.
And I, for the first time in my life, I thought, I'm a genre writer. I need an editor.
Yeah.
Because if somebody's going to hook onto a series, they've got to. And I was told at that time that you had to have one. And
Yeah.
I thought, I only know one.
I sort of thought you had to have an editor, so I don't know.
No, you didn't until the late 90s.
Yeah.
You could still send your books in, but not anymore. And I only knew one, and that was Beverly, and I met her through our work on Lily's story.
Right.
And this is a little bit off topic. We'll come back.
No, it's fine.
But I never considered myself a writer. I was a teacher and an academic who wrote poems and novels on the side.
Right.
So I was quite content in those years. I didn't really want to become like a genre novelist and have to go around and do readings and all. I did that with poetry in the 70s, and I quit. After 1980, I did no more traveling.
Yeah.
I thought it takes me away from my family. This is not what I want for my career.
Right.
I want to teach, and I want to write on the side. And so I sent my work to small publishers.
Right.
And that's why I never became famous.
Yeah, I suppose.
You can't do it any other way now, and you've got to get that sort of jump with the major publisher. Now I was very lucky because Simon & Schuster is a major publisher.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I was going to say. Is you have published with some major publishing houses over the years.
Yeah, McClellan Stewart had done done my academic work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And McClellan Stewart did the first two mysteries.
Yeah.
And that we can loop now back to Bev because I sent the first two to her. By golly, I got a phone call.
Yeah.
I mean, people still were using the phone. Bev was still using the phone. This would be in early 2003, 2002, probably.
Yeah.
So I get a phone call, and she said, I like your novels. Are there going to be more? And I said, well, I'm thinking of at least 3 and maybe 4.
Yeah. And
she said, oh, I love a series. She said, all agents love series because there's one they get their royalty, their cut.
They've only got to sell it once.
Every time a new book comes out.
Yeah, she's only got to sell it once.
She only got to sell it once, and then I just keep selling it.
Yep.
So she said, I'll see what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks later, she calls again, and she says, McClellan Stewart have offered to publish the first 2.
Nice.
And I just about fainted. That was
and
that was the first time I've actually thought, well, maybe I am a writer in another sense, with the capital W.
Right.
And since I was retired, I thought, well, maybe I could be a writer. So I started to take the publication of my work, even though unfortunately most of it was finished. But I was really disappointed when McClellan Stewart didn't publish the third one.
Yeah.
And Bev worked very hard and got a little publisher out in St. John, New Brunswick, to do the third one, Vital Secrets.
Yep.
And so we had 3 out. And then it was, and this would be in 2003, the first 2 came out.
Mm-hmm.
2005 or 6, Vital Secrets came out.
Yep. And
then there was a lull. When nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I kept writing.
Right.
And
Didn't you get up to 9 at that point?
Yeah, I probably was up to about 9 at that point.
Yeah.
And very interested in my arc. So what I would be doing at this stage, each time a new project was needed, I looked at the next movement towards responsible government. How can I create, like most of the novels, either a personal or a political motive?
Mm-hmm.
That's how they're built.
Yep.
And if there's anything unique about them, that's it. They all deal with politics or personal, and you're never sure as they go along whether they're personal or whether they're public.
Yeah, absolutely.
So by what happened about 2010 or 11, Bev finally sold them to Simon & Schuster, and that was a story in itself.
Yeah. Because
the Kevin, whose last names escape me, at Simon & Schuster, was with one of the other publishers that I had sent my mysteries to, or not my mysteries, but my mysteries to.
Mm-hmm.
And he liked them,
Yeah.
but his publisher at that time wouldn't publish them.
Mm-hmm.
So then Simon & Schuster opened up a Canadian branch
Right.
about 2010 or 11,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted to make their mark by publishing something Canadian.
Right.
And actually they're a big distributor for all the big American writers, but they wanted to have a little Canadian group.
Right.
And Kevin Hansen's his name.
Okay.
Kevin Hansen remembered my books,
Mm-hmm.
and he contacted Beverly
Oh.
and said, "Are those books still available?" And she said,
Oh.
"You bet they are."
Nice.
So we signed a contract, 2 contracts for 3, and then another 3, and then the omnibus,
Right.
and that's how they all got out there.
Mm-hmm.
So that covers how the things got
Yeah.
going. But shall we get back to the?
Sure. Well, the one thing I wanted to ask you about, and I guess this can sort of lead us back to talking about the characters in the book, because
Right.
they're fascinating. The thing that you touched on that I wanted to touch on a little more, though, is that setting it in York was an ambitious thing, because then you're obligated to get it right. Sort of.
Right.
I think from your mindset, of course, you would be obligated to get it right. But
Exactly.
setting it in a place and time that specific makes it incumbent on you.
I had a map of central Toronto.
Yeah.
The old maps exist; they're easy to find,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the streets are accurate. Where Cobb's house would be, where Mark's house would be, you can put them on a map,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that is extremely accurate.
Well, and then beyond that, I mean, I feel like we always end up talking about Dickens a lot, but it sort of feels a little bit Dickens-like, how you've captured the smell and the stink of the place and the fire, torches at night and the muddy roads and all of that. You capture it well. Was it just from that source material you were able to pick that kind of thing up?
That and your imagination, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, it was called Muddy York.
I know that.
It was a terrible place.
Just a prevailing filth.
Yeah. And then you create characters in an environment as well.
Mm-hmm.
The environment helps you think of the kind of people who would be there. The upper crust, the Tory types.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of them in the book.
Yep.
And I always have lots of ordinary people,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the first book, but in the second one as well.
And that leads me to a character that, all the characters you've created, of course, deserves special mention, and that's Constable Cobb.
Horatio Cobb.
Constable Horatio Cobb. His first appearance is in Solemn Vows. Solemn Vows.
Solemn Vows.
And he's an amazing character. Where did he spring from?
I knew you were going to ask that.
Yeah,
one.
well, I have to.
Straight out of my imagination.
Yeah.
And he is one of the dearest characters I've ever created.
Mm-hmm.
But he's funny, but I don't make fun of him. He takes himself
Mm-hmm.
quite seriously, but he's witty.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the humor is simply the interplay between Mark, who doesn't get a lot of the remarks that
Mm-hmm.
that Cobb makes, little asides that Cobb makes that hit the reader, but that sort of glance off Mark.
Yeah.
Because Mark is still learning. He's never dealt with ordinary people before.
And it's so easy to make a bumbling police officer to interact with your whip-smart detective.
Yeah.
But a constable that is ostensibly somewhat bumbling, but sharp and witty and funny,
Yeah.
is not the usual trope. And I think it's much more entertaining than just your average sidekick.
I would have used somebody like Wilkie,
Mm-hmm.
whom I do laugh at. He is a bumbler.
Yes.
And he's in and out a lot of the books, you'll discover. Right up to the very end, Wilkie is there.
Mm-hmm.
But Wilkie likes a good dinner and a good snooze.
Yep.
But so Cobb is not that kind of character.
No.
No, in fact, his father loved Shakespeare, and Mark asked him, "How did you get that strange name?" And he said, I was named after some fellow who wrote a book."
Oh, Horatio, I
Horatio.
knew him.
I knew him. Yeah.
Yep. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I forgot about
He's
that.
named after Horatio from Hamlet.
Yep.
And when you get to Death of a Patriot, if you read that far, the Mark and Cobb take a sleigh ride from Toronto to Detroit in order to solve a mystery, and they stop off at Cobb's place farm near Woodstock.
Yep.
And there's a scene in where the old man hardly recognizes Cobb. The old man is dying, and Cobb. There's a very touching scene where he and Cobb reenact Gobbo and Old Gobbo from The Merchant of Venice.
Yep.
They reenact that scene. And it's very so his sophistication, and of course his bright kids, they come into it all the way through.
Yep. They're in there from the first.
They're in there from the first, and they come back again and again as characters, and they kid back and forth. And Adora is a bit of a character as well, his wife.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Another sort of self-actualizing female character.
Yeah.
With agency of her own.
With agencies of her own, yeah. She's in quite a few of the novels, and
I guess that leads me to something I sort of notice in a lot of your work, is you like to write these strong female agent characters. You don't write the retiring wallflower all that well. Would you consider yourself a progressivist on that front? Like, do you think, were you trying to do that intentionally, or is that just how you feel?
No. Well, it was both.
Yeah.
Both. But no, I was raised by strong women, and they also have a comic touch to them as well. So it's a combination of both. They're somewhat Dickensian, a bit exaggerated, perhaps, just slightly. But
I feel like your sort of gold standard for that has to be M in Winter's Descent, because chronologically she's one of the earliest of this type of character.
This type of character, yeah.
And she is just so over the top, but hilarious.
Hilarious, yeah.
And I think this sort of brings me to one thing. I guess I have all these observations after reading some of these books, but you can let me know what you think. But it seems like your comedy, when you indulge in it, which is often, is not... It's not like you're doing a set-up punchline. It's all the situation and the character.
The character, yeah.
And how they're interacting with their world in a way that isn't just sort of ha-ha funny. It's very sort of engagingly funny. Was that something you were naturally talented at, or did you develop that with time?
I think I started with Bus Ride, actually, yeah.
That's what I was going to ask.
I think it started, and I don't know, that's like Cobb. I don't know where that came from, because when you get a chance to get into the archives and read the stuff that I wrote in the 60s, you would never guess that Bus Ride would appear. It would. I mean, I took poetry and everything deadly seriously.
Very serious young academic in those days.
And very serious academic. And so Bus Ride came right out of the blue, and I laughed as I wrote it. I thought, this is funny stuff. How am I doing that?
Yeah.
And I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And so I've been doing it off and on whenever the opportunity presents itself to create character or characters like that, whether it's in the mysteries or in the serious novels.
Yeah.
I just go ahead and do it.
That's great. And I think that is another area I wanted to talk to you about. You've said before a number of times that you had trouble writing dialogue initially. Clearly that trouble had evaporated by the time these novels came around, because they're heavily dialogue-based.
They're heavily dialogue-based. Yeah, I thought that as I read the three of them yesterday, that the dialogue moves the book. Yeah.
You really aren't doing much exposition.
No.
And that, I think, is one of the strengths of these novels, is it's more immersive when you don't have an omniscient narrator explaining for you. or even having Mark narrate it himself.
Yeah. Well, as a reader of many mystery novels, I hate what we call filler, where the main detective goes off and talks about all the rock and roll albums he likes and shows off all he knows. And I hate the kind of novel where every time they go into a room, you get a page and a half description of the room. I don't do that. I let the characters come into the room and talk, and if there's something in the room if they're sitting at a desk or something, the desk is mentioned so you know it's an office, and that's it.
Well, and then the other thing you don't do, which I like, is you don't do the expository prose in the aha moment. When there's an aha moment, you let it ramify in the reader's head. You don't have Mark saying, I get it now. It must be this guy that committed the crime.
Oh, yeah.
You let it sort of either ramify in the reader's head or remain a mystery until Mark actually confronts the person. You don't get that Jacques Hughes moment very often.
No, not very often, no. I did it once in Turncoat when he thought it was Azel Stebbins, and he said, I know who it is now. But when he actually did know who it was, he said, I'm off to find a murderer, and something like that. But I don't do that very often.
No, it was and the one was a fake out.
Yeah, and one was a fake out.
And that makes it, because that's one of the, I don't know, that's a trope in mystery novels I don't love, and so I like that you don't do that.
No.
It can be a little charming when Poirot does it, but that's great, and I think that's one of the, like, these are novels written by a novelist. Like, I feel like a lot of the things that you found challenging, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, in earlier books had started to come naturally by the time these were coming out. And it's just interesting to note that you were still developing as an author at this point in your career.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and quite a good one. That's right. Yeah, I was asked at the reading, the video you've seen, whether I consider these entertainments or serious literature, and I said they're entertainments, but I try and make them as good as I possibly can.
Yeah,
they're not throwaways to me.
Well, and they're not fluff.
No,
it's all over the face of them that they're not fluff.
Yeah.
I'm currently flagellating myself by listening to the new Dan Brown novel, and I just cringe the whole way through. It's engaging, but it's a trope a minute, and so these these sort of it's just funny to be considering these two very opposite forms of novel at the same time.
Well, that's, as I said a few minutes ago, I started ironically as a genre writer.
Yeah.
I started to feel more like writer with a capital W.
Yeah.
I thought, I am really into this stuff now. I can sit down and in 6 to 8 weeks I can write one of these novels and come up with one a year.
Yeah. I guess.
Well, more than one a year.
Yeah,
actually.
over one a year if you count them all up, because it hasn't been 12 years since you first published one.
No, it hasn't been 12 years, no.
The thing that I guess sort of, and I guess this might be hard for you from an inside perspective, but I want to ask you anyway, what do you think is the strongest Edwards novel, and what do you think is the weakest?
I like, now that I've reread it, I like the second one, and I like Desperate Acts, where Cobb goes underground as a Shakespearean actor, and there's some hilarious scenes in that I really love.
That's a good one.
And the next one is even funnier, called Unholy Alliance, and it's a country mansion mystery.
Yeah, it's a bottle episode.
Yeah, the bottle episode. You remember? Yep. And Cobb is sent out, and he gets involved with this another one of these women. I've forgotten about her.
Yep, I didn't.
Who just about crushes them. Yeah, I just remembered her. I even forgotten her name, Mrs. Somebody or other. Yeah, he goes out there, but they both solve the mystery at the same time, and so on. So that I guess when I look at all 12 of them and read the summaries and think about them, is just how many different variations on the theme. I finally ran out of gas, in the 12th one. But fortunately, I had reached 1840, where responsible government, although not official, does begin.
Yeah, that's sort of the de facto start of what you had been building on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. We get the French-English alliance, which then pretty much dominates the 1840s, and officially Britain in 1848 grants responsible government as a legal entity.
Right.
But it's a de facto entity from the early 1840s on.
Yeah. No, exactly. Okay, that's great. Oh, one thing I did want to touch on as well, and just because it relates to a book I know is very dear to you, which is Lily's Story. If any of our listeners are hearing about Lily's Story for the first time, go on back and have a listen to that episode. I think it's one of our best, and I know it's a novel that's very dear to you. That was your first foray into playing with historical characters as characters in fiction. It is a prominent part of the Edwards novels. In the first couple, you have, is it Mackenzie?
Yeah, Mackenzie's in the first one, and of course Sir John Colborne, the governor, yeah. And in the second one, Sir Francis Bond Head is a major character all the way through it.
And I believe there's one novel, and is this Turncoat, where the politician's shot dead? I forget.
Oh no, that's the second one.
That's Solemn Vows.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the question I have is that something you enjoy, or does it come as like a intimidating challenge?
I must admit I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote. That's why the novels came so quickly. Was that it takes a little bit to get started. That's why I finally quit, because I thought I don't have it in me anymore to create the embryo you need, and all I need to get going after that.
Put all the groundwork in place.
Put all the groundwork involved. I had done an awful lot, and I actually had, in fact, I just found it the other day in my binder, an outline for number 13.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But then I did write the Little Village one. The Constable Garrett and the Dead Ringer.
Well, that brings me to what I was going to ask about next. Constable Garrett and the Dead Ringer is a one-off.
Yes.
Based in, it's Point Edward too, right?
Yes, it's Point Edward.
And that was just published in the last couple years?
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Like, how did you get an idea to sort of about face to that?
It was written a lot earlier. I don't have all the records are in the archives, so I can't check all these things. But on my computer, it's listed as 2004 or 5, so it was written while I was writing the other series.
Oh, okay.
And again, I'm looking for new projects, and I read a number of what are called British cozies. And cozies are cute little cottage mysteries set in tiny little villages in England.
Yeah.
They're called cozies. And I thought, I wonder if I could write a cozy.
Yeah. And that was what you were going for?
That's got that one going. But I couldn't think up any more plots.
Well, it's a good novel, and it's a quick read too. It's only about 200 pages.
It's 48,000 words. Yeah, it's really a novella.
Yeah, so it's a good afternoon read. Is Garrett in print? Can people get Constable Garrett?
Yes, they can. It's in print. Yeah.
And
but the that was just a challenge that I wanted to set myself to see if I could write one like that. And of course, Point Edward is there again.
I mean,
and
if you've listened to any of what we've done, you would know Point Edward it will always make an appearance.
Yeah. And I do change the names of the streets. I have no reason why I do that. I notice now that we go back over all these novels doing these sessions, that I'm not consistent. One time I'll use the name of the streets, and the next time I won't use the name of the street. I don't know why.
You, because Garrett occurs in the time period with Lily, right? It's within the scope of Lily's story?
No.
It's a little
It's
earlier?
a Depression novel.
Oh, it's after.
Yeah, it's a Depression novel.
I had it in the 1830s in my mind. It's 1930s.
1930s. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted it in a very quiet period of our history. And
So it's closer to contemporaneous with All in Good Time, if it was contemporaneous with any of your work.
yeah.
Okay. That's fascinating. I sort of wondered, because Constable Garrett kind of came out of nowhere a couple of years ago for me. But
and then I just decided to publish it myself. So it's available, but it hasn't had a wide distribution.
right.
I falsely thought that if people liked my other novels, they would like this one, but people are very loyal to series.
Yes.
They don't branch out.
Well, you'd see how people received Joe Rowling's novel to get us. I mean, they were polite about it, but
Yeah.
people really just wanted another Harry Potter book.
Yeah.
That's great, Grandpa. Okay. Anything else you want to touch on?
Well, we were going to talk a little bit, just to maybe around this last session of the series, talk a little bit about
Yeah.
where I see myself in.
Yeah, and so I have a few questions on that front. Do you think there's anything we need to wrap up on Edwards?
No, we could mention that I like, of all the plots I've written, I liked the third novel has one of the best plots and the most surprising kinds of things in it.
All right, well, I'll set you up for that then. Well, Grandpa, we're winding down a little on the Edwards topic, but one thing I did want to ask you about is, as far as plotting the Edwards novels, were there any plots that really stuck out for you, or that you thought were especially good?
There's one, but I can't remember which novel it was now. Maybe I can if I look at the
Oh yeah, our précis there.
where they had to flush out. I think that's Desperate Acts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they have to flush out the killer. They can't find the evidence.
Right.
So they create an interesting scenario where they go to, they send out some bait and
to draw the suspect out.
yeah, and there's the hilarious. Cobb has a hilarious snitch or two that he uses, and the snitch takes notes around and drops them at various people's houses who belong to the the troop.
And this snitch has one of the best names in all the series, and that this is Itchy Quick, right?
Itchy Quick.
Yes. Okay. A character I remember well.
Yeah. Itchy goes around and drops the bait at the various actors' houses, and the one who takes up the bait, they meet him in the town square somewhere, and they surprise him, and he confesses. And that's the first time I've actually used that.
Yeah.
With what is one of the tropes, flush them out.
Yeah.
Kind of
the
trope.
breadcrumb trail.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a trope, but it's not a point for point trope. So we'll let that one slide. I guess the question I always ask you, Grandpa, how does it feel to revisit these works? They're not so remote as some of the ones we've done time wise, but
No.
how does it feel to read them over again?
I read the three of them Friday and Saturday, and what struck me was a point you made earlier, that they really are novels. I'm really quite proud of them as novels.
Yeah.
And even though they were genre books, they have historical content, they have good characterization, they have humor, and they have not great but decent plots. Enough to keep you going.
Yeah, and keep you engaged, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear it. I mean, I quite enjoy the Mark Edwards series. I'm not a mystery guy in general, but I love the historical period pieces, and so that has kept me engaged with them. I I think if I had to pick a favorite, it would be Solemn Vows, just because I think you were firing on all cylinders on that one.
And I thought the same when I read it yesterday. I thought, this is a funny book.
It's a great novel.
And the Bond head is... Even he's a comic character. He's so over the top in the way he runs.
Mm-hmm.
He runs his office.
Yes, and stuffy and starchy and all the things you would expect.
Yeah,
but humorously rendered, absolutely.
Rendered, yeah.
No, well, that's good, and I'm glad we get to share this with people. The Mark Edwards mysteries are all in print as of now. They're available in chapters. You can get the most recent one at Chapters now. They're available on Amazon in the reselling market. They're probably, of your works, the most available because they've been published by some of the larger houses in more recent years.
Yeah.
So that's great. I really would encourage our listeners to pick up the Mark Edwards series. Start somewhere near the beginning. You might as well start with Turncoat and go from there. And that's been great talking with you about that, Grandpa. We're coming to the end of these sessions.
Mm-hmm.
We've covered a lot of ground. We started with your early mythic poetry. We went through some of your early novels. We got through the autobiographical novels. We talked about Lily's story. We talked about some of the later novels. And now we've got a chance to talk about Edwards. That's a pretty good survey. Although this morning, this afternoon rather, Grandpa informed me that works I had considered lost, and we had considered lost, are actually in the depths of the Weldon Library. So, with some digging, we can find some earlier works. I promise not to publicize the poetry you think is bad.
No, it's fair enough to write about it. Everybody has juvenilia, but
absolutely,
yeah.
But I guess in light of everything we've done, how has it felt to walk down all these paths again? Retrack all these footsteps?
Well, it's helped me see myself in perspective as a writer.
Yeah.
As I said to you a few minutes ago, I had never really considered myself a writer first and foremost because I was so heavily involved in teaching and the research involved around teaching. I've done 10 academic books and had a busy, wonderful family life. And so I never wanted to be a rock star novelist or a rock star poet. And but I've come to believe, since we've been going over these works and the way people have been responding to them over the last few years, I have a group of great supporters who comment on my work, and people like John B. Lee, who is trying to convince me that I'm a major poet, even though it'll be a generation before anybody comes back and has a look at it.
Yeah. Well, same thing happened to Al Purdy.
Yeah.
He wasn't so popular in his time, and then he picked up steam later. John B. Lee is, of course, a luminary in the Canadian literature world, so praise from him means something. Yeah. And you've got your fans in the academic world too. We've got our friend Kane Foucher up at Western, and lots of people are real supporters of the work, and it makes me happy that we could take a walk through it all together and look at it in the detail it deserves. The thing that I guess I want to know from you is, were there any surprises along the way? Was there anything that you had not thought of before, or something that you had missed that jumped out through our discussions? Anything you can think of? Just how it made you feel or anything.
Well, I think the going back and doing Riel over again was a surprise. I hadn't looked at it for years, and what surprised me as we've gone along is that I think I'm actually better than I thought I was. I mean, I shouldn't put it like that, but that's the way I feel. The stuff looked good to me, and it's good to come back to it after a while, because then you've got years of perspective on it.
Absolutely.
And it's the same as if I looked at my juvenilia. I would probably bring up, but I made the decision to put it into the archive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there, and I hope anybody who writes about me will take it as it is and get on to the serious work. The biggest surprise of my whole writing life, of course, was Lily's story. I had no idea I would write a 289,000 word, 286,000 word novel. I didn't think I had that in me.
Yeah.
And then to be blessed by those two short memoir novels, especially Summer's Idol, which we both like so much.
Yeah. Well, and a couple of friends of mine have now read it, and they feel the same. I mean, that, I have told you before, is my favorite of your novels. Do you see Lily as your triumph?
Yeah, I guess because of the weight of it. But I'm with you on Summer's Idol. I think Summer's Idol is like a prose poem. You can't pull a line out of it. It's one of the most. My editor at Oberon said it's a minor masterpiece. But unfortunately, Oberon, when that work came out, Oberon had made the decision that they would not return books, and bookstores quit buying their books. So does
that mean they won't take them back if someone returns them?
Yeah.
Oh.
And so
That's bizarre.
Oberon hasn't sold a book to a bookstore in 20 years.
So do you have to buy directly from them?
You have to buy directly from them.
Oh, that's very strange. I never knew that.
So that's what happened to those two memoir novels, and they never got reviewed.
Yeah, it explains it.
He doesn't even send out review copies anymore. I mean, and of course I realized this too late. I was quite happy to have Oberon as my publisher because, as I say, I didn't see myself as a capital W writer, and these things were coming out. They were going on my Vitae and making it look good. Got me raises at the university and all this sort of stuff. So, but no, this series has made me stop and look at myself as a writer, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. It's been amazing, and I think it's, these are works that deserve careful consideration, and I think we do a good job of it between you and I, and if it inspires someone to pick up the work, that much the better. What can we expect from you going forward? What's bringing you joy now? What do you see yourself writing from here on in?
A few more little poems. I'm starting to feel as if I might, as I did with my series literary novel, they might be coming near the end of the poetry. But I've got 4 books.
Yes.
So I'll be publishing for the next 3 years.
And so
that keeps my interest up.
Absolutely.
Seeing them through the publisher and hoping to get reviews and all that sort of thing. So it keeps me alert and interested. But as my friend John Lee said in an email last week, he said, you'll never stop writing. And Marty Gervais said the same thing.
Admittedly, I will be very concerned if you ever stop writing. So, so what's in the pipeline right now? We've got Inklings coming out.
Inklings is out.
Inklings is out, and that's from Black Moss Press.
Yeah, it came out in August. And we've got miniatures coming out from Black Moss next fall, fall of 18. We've got Mare's Lamp coming out in the fall of 19 from Black Moss Press. And I've got 2 other collections.
Really?
One called Home Ground, which I'm going to use my friend Jerry Parker's paintings as a cover for. And I've written a poem about the cover. So it was called Home Ground, but I'm going to call it Black Lake and Other Poems.
Right.
And I wrote Marty Gervais last week, and I said, Do you know what month the miniatures is coming out? Because I think I'm going to self-publish the Black Lake and other poems myself, and I want to leave some breathing space between the two books.
Yeah.
So he's going to get back to me on that. So sometime next year, I'll probably publish 2 books.
Great.
And I still got Cameron Lake, which I'll team up with Mare's Lamp the next year. I'll have 2 more out, and that will probably be it. In the meantime, I'm still scribbling. I wrote a poem yesterday.
Well, you write a poem most every Remembrance Day. You don't just lean back on all the ones you've written so far.
No.
And the poems are still coming. Like, you've sent me a few. No, that's great, and I think that'll be something to look forward to. As far as the future of this series goes, this will be sort of a bookend for a lot of what we've done, but we'll plan to record a few more as stuff comes out, and I do really want to have the Cameron Lake suite to share with everyone because it's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll do a Cameron Lake at some point when
Absolutely.
it comes out, Yeah.
Well, this has been an amazing experience, Grandpa. Thank you so much for sharing everything with me, for sharing everything with everyone, and it's been wonderful.
Well, it's been hugely my pleasure, Tom, and thank you.
Well, you're very welcome.
But you stop me saying no, no, no. I guess I'll stay on by a little longer.
I hope you enjoyed Don and I's conversation. These were fun novels to talk about, and it was good to get into the inspiration that brought Grandpa into writing mysteries. It's something he's clearly passionate about, and it was really nice to get to talk to him about it. As far as the future of this podcast goes, we've got a couple more topics to discuss. We'll actually be recording, I believe, tomorrow, another episode about a poetry collection that is somewhat more recent. And Grandpa does have a couple poetry collections coming out, one later this year and one next year, all available from Black Moss Press in Canada. And our friend Marty Gervais over at Black Moss is a great supporter of Grandpa, and we're so grateful for that. So, as always, thank you so much for joining us on There and Then. I'm Tom Gutteridge. Take care of yourself.
But you stop me saying no, no, no. I guess I'll stay on by